Thank you for joining me on my channel So Stylish with LCB, where I like sharing my sewing tips and techniques with you. I'm also the distributor in South Africa for Schufer Design's pattern fitting system, and now and then I am going to be sharing a little bit more on pattern making as well. Now today's video we are going to be continuing with our t-shirt. The previous video I had you looking at the free patterns that I suggested. I gave you 3 patterns to choose from. It was the plantain t-shirt. Now the plantain is the one that I really like, so you can see my navy t-shirt is the plantain. This t-shirt also, again, the plantain. I just love it that it's fitted around the shoulders and the bust, and also that I've got that slight flare happening to the hem. Now the others that I've also given you to choose from was the anything but basic t-shirt and also the core t-shirt. So I'm hoping that by now you've downloaded your videos, that you've printed and taped your paper together, and that you've also cut out your fabric so that you can follow along now and start sewing your t-shirt. Now also what I do want to mention with this t-shirt that I am sewing, there's a couple of videos that I am going to suggest you look at beforehand. Because I've previously done or covered all that information, I didn't add it into this video so that it's not too overwhelming for you, too much to try and search for if you want to go back to go and check something out again. So those videos I'm going to link for you below in the description box. And the first one that you are going to have a look at for me is going to be my where I talk about setting your differential feed on your overlocker. So if you are going to be doing your t-shirt on the overlocker, I sewed my whole t-shirt on the overlocker, only the hems that I do on my sewing machine. I want you to make sure that the fabric that you're working with now, that you do go and have a look at how you're going to test it and set that differential for me. Now if you are going to be sewing on a sewing machine, there's also a couple of things that you're going to test for me before you start sewing. You are going to first of all just test your stitch. You want to make sure that the stitch that you're working with is going to be correct for the fabric that you're working with. So you want to make sure that stitch has got a little bit of stretch. I've done videos before, again linked below, where I did talk about how I set my machine in when I'm working with stretch fabrics, because I do prefer to work with a straight stitch. So go and have a look at that video. It just talks you through lowering your foot pressure, maybe going lower on your top tension as well, until, oh yes, and a longer stitch, slightly longer stitch length, just so that you can feel that that stitch is giving when you are actually pulling a little bit on that fabric. So that's what you're going to look at for me. If you want to as well, your other option is a very small zigzag stitch. You can see on the photo that I'm sharing my settings on my machine for that stretch stitch that I do sometimes use. Now it's also called a lightning stitch nowadays on our newer sewing machines. So it's already one of your built-in stitches that you might have. Go and have a look at that for me. Then another thing that I'm going to suggest if you're working on a sewing machine and you're working with stretch fabrics is if you do have a walking foot or you have dual feed on your machine, engage it. Work with that walking foot or engage that dual feed. It's just going to help pull that fabric through as you are sewing so that it's not stretching unnecessary. So make sure that you do go and just check out those videos. Now another thing that I'm also going to mention here before we go into the sewing now is that I'm taking you through the steps that I use as I am sewing. Maybe in the instructions that you are given with that specific pattern there might be something different as well. I know in the plantain t-shirt they do sew in clear elastic into the shoulder seams to stabilize it. I didn't do it when I sewed my t-shirt. Sometimes I find the clear elastic just feels a little bit hard on that shoulder or in that shoulder seam, and I've also had here where when I did once work with the clear elastic, after a couple of washes it just started feeling, I don't know, it just didn't feel right for me anymore. I can't explain it to you. So I don't like working with clear elastic. I know there's some people that do love working with it. What I would rather do if I need to support a seam when I am going to be working with stretch fabric is I'll rather go and cut a strip of the fabric I'm working with, and as I'm sewing that seam I put that extra strip on top of my fabric and I just pull it slightly as I'm sewing. It just pulls it in a little bit. This information is also one of my, I think, first videos where I did talk about that technique. I did it for a neckline, but I also do it sometimes in the shoulders, in my hems as well, if I'm working with super stretchy fabric. But the fabric that I've worked, my blue fabric, which is a bonbon fabric, as well as this fabric that I have on, I just felt I didn't need to stabilize the shoulders at all, so I didn't do that. But like I said, go through those instructions and make sure you make notes as you're going. If there's anything you want to maybe just highlight for yourself, just go and work with that instructions as well. So let's get ready now. We're going to move on to our sewing of our t-shirt. We're now going to start sewing our t-shirt, but I do want to mention something here for our new dressmakers. I want you to get into the habit of preparing your pattern pieces. Now, if I'm saying preparing pattern pieces, that is the pattern pieces where you can go and press it at this point. If there's any stay stitching, any fusible interfacing to be done for that project you're working on, you're going to go and do that first. It just makes it so much easier when you actually start sewing, because when you're sitting in front of your sewing machine or your overlocker, you can just pin these pattern pieces together. All the fusible interfacing, everything that needs to be done beforehand is done. Now, for this project we're working with, we're not going to be doing any stay stitching on that neckline because we can stretch it out. We do have a neckband that we're going to be sewing on, which will be smaller than the neckline, so we are going to be pulling it as we're sewing it on, and that will then also help stabilize that neck area. Now, for my preparation that I've done, I've already gone and I've pressed my neckband. So all you're going to do with the neckband, as you've got this long strip, you're going to fold it in half and you're going to go and press it. Make sure that your raw edges that you have here, you're going to match it perfectly when you are folding this band in half. I don't want you to be stretching it while you're pressing it. You're just folding it over, making sure there's no tucks or anything happening here. You can see it's nicely relaxed, and I went and I pressed it. Now, when I do press, I also use my clapper at this point because I do get a really flat edge on that fold of the fabric. You'll also note that when I pressed my neckband, that I did it as a long strip. I haven't gone and sewn these edges together yet. I just feel it's easier for me to press first so that I can then afterwards go and pin and sew it on those areas. Now, my other preparation that I've done for my pattern is to go and just do a bit of a fusible interfacing on my hem. Now, this is optional. It's not in your instructions, and if you don't have a stretch fusible, you're just going to ignore what I'm going to say to you here now. But I do like actually doing a little bit of my fusible interfacing, especially on a fabric that I feel will be rolling on those edges. But as you can see, my fusible interfacing is a stretch fusible, so it is stretching with my fabric. Please don't go and do a normal fusible interfacing that's usually for a woven. That means there's no stretch to that fusible. You're not going to use it with a stretch fabric. I want my fusible to actually behave like my fabric. If the fabric is stretching, my fusible must be stretching as well. So this, as I said, is an optional thing that I always do. It is not necessary, so you can skip the section. But if you by chance do have a stretch fusible, then go and do your little edge over there where we're going to be sewing the hem. Now, I did look for what the hem allowance is on this t-shirt. It's 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch. So I just cut my fusible interfacing that 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch, so that by the time I get to the hem and I'm going to be pressing, I'm folding it perfectly on the edge of my fusible interfacing there. Now, I did this fusible interfacing on my front, my back, and I also did it on the edge of my sleeve where I'm going to be folding it for my hem on the sleeve. So that is the preparation that I've done now for these pattern pieces. So let's start pinning our pattern pieces together. You're going to take out your front pattern piece and your back pattern piece for me. Now, we're going to place the fabric right sides together. So as you can see, for the front that I'm working with, that is my wrong side. I've got the printed side, which is the right side. So I'm placing that first, and that is facing right side up. And then when you're going to place your back pattern piece, make sure now that the right side is on the right side of the front. So all I'm going to do is pin my shoulder seams, and I want you to place them together, and when you're going to pin it, Try and pin always the edges. So I'll pin at the neck point, at the shoulder point, and then I'll put a pin in between. And the reason for that is with some of our stretch fabrics, especially if you're working with a longer seam as well, let's say the side seam, you're going to find that if you just pin from one side all the way down, that by the time you get to that last pin, you might not be matching up. You might have that one pattern piece is longer than the other one. And it sometimes happens because it's the way that the fabric is hanging, the way that we're pinning. So I always recommend that you go and just pin these edges first, matching them up, and in between, if you need to, you can always stretch the fabric to smooth it out. Now, I've seen so many times when I had my Benina shop and I did beginner dressmaking classes, where it went wrong because of that pinning from one side. So this is something that I always like to highlight when we are pinning. You'll also notice that I am pinning this way. I am not putting the pin with the seam allowance. So let's just go and pin this side. I'm going to be sewing my t-shirt on my overlocker. I just prefer sewing knits with the overlocker because I've got my differential feed that I can use to prevent any stretching out of the seams. And also the overlock stitch itself also still gives, it also moves with the fabric. Now the plantain t-shirt that I am making has got a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So I'm going to make sure that I'm just skimming off a little bit on this edge. I'm not going to be cutting off too much, because then I'm changing the fit, I'm changing the size of the pattern. So please make sure if you're working on your sewing machine or on your overlocker, use the correct seam allowance. Remember to remove your pins before you get close to that blade. You don't want to damage your blade. And you'll see also I'm not pulling on my fabric, I'm just guiding it. My left hand is holding it in place, guiding it. Usually if I've got a longer seam, then I will control it with my right hand on this section. But with this now, I'm just holding it in place, making sure that if there's any movement that I do lift a little bit and I reposition that fabric. I've just pressed my shoulder seams now as well, so please make sure once you've sewn your shoulder seams that you do go press them. You want to press them to the back of your garment, and these little pieces of thread that you have, please get into the habit that once you've sewn a seam that you go clip off those extra threads. Sometimes as a beginner sewer you don't go and clip all of that, but it becomes quite untidy after a while. So learn the right habits from the start when you are doing your dressmaking. Now another thing that I also just wanted to touch on, and this is for the pressing, when I do work with stretch fabrics, and this is now if I'm working on my sewing machine and also on my overlocker, when I press, I will first go and just press the seam as it is. The seam is closed up, I'm going to press it like that. It just sets the stitches for me. And if you've worked on a sewing machine and you do find that you have a little bit of a waving, I will just hold it, hold the iron above it and steam this area and press it down with my hand just to bring the fabric in. And once I've brought that fabric back in, I will go and just put my iron on it, press it for a couple of seconds, then I will go and I'll open up the garment and I will go and press the seam to the back. That is just a process that I find works so well when we are working with stretch fabrics. Now our next step that we are going to do is to go and sew on our neckband. Now you'll find different patterns, different companies. Some people will tell you to put on the neckband now. Other companies might tell you sew on the sleeves now and then you do the neckband. I prefer working with the neckband at this stage before I've got the sleeve on, before these seams are closed. It's just less fabric for me to handle, and also I can really open up this garment and it makes it easier for me when I am pinning and when I'm also going to be sewing as well. So let's look at the neckband now. We are going to take our neckband. Remember, we already pressed it on that fold line that we had. We pressed it so we've got a double layer. You're just going to sew it for me on this edge. You're going to go and press it as well. Once you've pressed it, you're going to close it up again and make sure that on this area where we've got the extra bulk of that seam now, that you just go press it for me so it's nice and flat on that area again. Then we're going to go and we're going to divide our neckline now in quarters, and we're also going to divide the neckband in quarters. We want to make sure that when we're pinning it, that we accurately spreading the neckband on this neckline area. The neckband is slightly smaller, so I've got to stretch it a little bit as I'm going to be pinning it. Also having our quarters, or even if you feel more comfortable with eighths, you can even go and measure it in eighths. We're going to be finding that we're not pulling more on one section as we are sewing. We're really going to be working from pin to evenly get this sewn on. So the neckband now, to just get our quarters, I'm going to just pick it up on where that fold line is, or that seam is, and you'll see I'm not pulling on my neckband. I'm literally just putting it and sliding it over my hand, trying to get that center front over there. So once I've actually got that, I'm going to just go and pin it. You can work with a marker as well, but I'm just going to place a pin on that section. So that's going to be center front. Where we have the fold, that is our center back. Now we're going to go and place the center front and center back on top of each other, and just again, just slide it on your hand where I've got this fold now. That is going to be where I'm going to place my pin. So let's just put a pin in that area, and let's just line up everything again there. And I'm going to, oops, it's just shifted on me. So I'm just going to again just fold it there, so I've got my placement for my or the mark where I want to put my pin in. You can double check yourself as well. If I'm going to put these two pins on top of each other, then I should have my pin on the center front, and I'll have my seam that I've got there for the center back as well. So that is done. As I mentioned, if you are feeling more comfortable and you would rather work in eighths and you need more pins, you're going to now take this pin and my center back where the seam is. You can go and place that on there as well, and you're going to do the same. That's just going to allow you to have more pins in when you're working, and this pin is really the placement for where we're going to mark it on the neck. So let's see, I'm going to work from pin to pin, placing pins on top of each other, and let's just make sure my pins are on top of each other here. There we go. And I'm just going to put another pin in. So that is how you will go and mark your eighths on your neckband. I'm actually going to leave it. I'm just going to work in my quarters. So let's see, we've got center back, center front over there. Let's just twist this so it's correct. I've got those two there as well. I'm just going to take this additional pin out. Now when we are going to mark our neckline, we also want to get a center back, a center front, and we're going to mark in between as well for our other quarter marks that we're going to be making. Please don't think that the shoulder seams that you're seeing is your quarter mark that you're going to be using. It is slightly to the front of it where we're going to be placing that pin. Also, again, this is a mistake that gets made quite often. People think that your pin here must match up to the shoulder seam. So all I'm going to do, again, I've got my shoulder seams on top of each other so that I can get my center back and I can get my center front. So again, this is going to be center back. I'm just going to pin it in here. I'm pinning it at this stage because we do have a small seam allowance. Usually when I've got a bigger seam allowance, I like to just nip in on those areas with my scissor. So again, we've got shoulder seams together, and let's just make sure everything is lining up. I take care when I'm doing this because some stretch fabrics, if they are very stretchy, it's so easy to stretch out a little bit more on one side, and you'll find that you are slightly off the mark that you need it. So that is now our center front, center back. I'm going to place my pins together, and we're going to get our next quarter mark. And as you can see here, let's just put them on top of each other. That is where my shoulder seam is. Look where this quarter mark is. We've got a longer measurement in the front neckline than the back. That's why we've got this shift to the front when we're doing the next quarter mark. So I'm going to pin that in there, and again I'm going to keep my pins together for center front, center back. There we go. And I'm going to do my next pin there. So I've marked all my quarter marks now on the neckline and on the neckband as well. I've just gone off camera and I just double checked myself that my pinning is correct, and I then decided that I'm rather going to work with 8 pins. So I did my quarters, and then in between each pin I did go and place another pin. So I've got 8 pins now. I've got my neckline divided by 8, and then I've also got the neckband that I've also done my pin. So all of this is also been divided by 8. I just think this section, I just wanted to double check. I didn't do a pin on this section, I just noticed it now. So I've just placed my pins on top of each other, and I'm just getting that halfway mark between each pin. So that's really all you're going to be doing. If you are doing 8 pins instead of 4, so you're not working with quarters, it's just place your pins on top of each other where you had your quarter marks, and then in between is where you're going to do your other pin. Now when we are going to pin the neckband on, we're going to start from that center back, and we want to make sure that the open edge, the raw edge, is going to be pinned to the raw edge of the neckline, and I've got to make sure that my neckband is going to be pinned on the right side of my top as well. So when I start pinning, I always go and I find that seam that I've sewn just to get that first mark where I'm going to start, and that is where I'm going to start pinning from this area. Now when you're pinning, just bring your neckline through. Let's just see, where's my raw edge? There we go. So that the neckline is basically on the inside of my neckband. And then I can go and I'm just going to place my first pin. So let's just get it through, and I'm going to turn it now so you can see what I'm doing. So you'll see the neckband is now on the right side of my fabric. And now when I'm going to be working with this, every time I'm just going to get the next pin for the neckline, the next pin for the neckband, placing those pins together, and I'm going to put my pin in there. So pinning exactly at that spot. And let's go to the next one. Let's just match those pins again, and I'm going to go all the way around, making sure that I'm placing those pins in there. And then when we look at our neckline here as well, I'll always go and check and see that between my pins that the neckline looks like it's evenly spaced on those areas. So there we go. When we're going to be sewing it, the neckband is going to be pulled so that it actually matches the length of our neckline. So I'm just going to go off camera. I'm going to go all the way around. I'm just going to pin it in place, and then I'm going to meet you back at my overlocker. Now when I sew my neckband for a t-shirt, I do like to start more or less at that center back. Because I'm working on my overlocker, I don't start exactly on where I've got the seam on my neckband. I'm just shifting it slightly to the front. Then I want you to note here as well, you'll see that I've just cut out a little bit on that section. When we're working with our overlocker, we want to make sure that we start with the stitching perfectly on the fabric. We don't want to start skew to try and get on to that neckband and then carry on straight. Then we're always going to get a little bit of a almost like a little point happening where we've sewn it. So I want to make sure that the amount that I'm going to be cutting off on the neckband, that is the amount that I've actually just cut into that area, to allow the blade of my overlocker to sit right next to that area, and then it's just going to carry on cutting on that section. Now when you're going to be doing it, make sure your needles are also in the higher position, and I've also just thrown off the thread so that I can slide my fabric in, and I think I'm just going to remove that pin over there so I can slide it in, so that the cut edge that I've just created is right against my blade and my fabric is perfectly and my needle is perfectly on the fabric there as well. Now I'm going to start sewing. Now I'm showing you on the overlocker, when you're going to be working on your sewing machine, you can use the free arm of the sewing machine. That means if you've got an accessory box, you're going to remove it, or if you've got a table, you can remove it, and you've got an open area on your sewing machine on that side. So you can just put the rest of the fabric underneath that free arm that you do have. So with the overlocker, I don't have a free arm, so I'm going to just make sure that I am accurately lining everything up. And you'll see when I do my neckline, I want to be accurate here. If I'm not going to be accurate, some areas of my neckline is going to look wider than other areas. With a sewing machine, it's easier. I've got my seam allowance lines on that stitch plate. So I think everything is looking fine, so I can start sewing. And you'll see I'm actually holding on to where that pin is. We want to make sure now that we stretch the neckband so that it fits with that extra length that we have on that neckline. So just keep on working and moving your fabric on the overlocker. Just be slow, don't go fast now. Here we've got to make sure we are doing everything accurately, and we don't want to go over any pins. So you can see I straighten it out as well. I'm going more on a curve, but on the overlocker I need to straighten this area. I'm not stretching excessively, I'm just pulling enough so that the neckband is lying on a flat neckline. So I'm trying, when I'm doing this, to not stretch out my neckline. And you'll see I'm not stretching at the back, I'm actually controlling on this area and just helping the fabric to feed through my, or under that presser foot. So I'm just going to carry on and just sew all the way around, making sure again that I'm working from pin to pin, making sure also when I'm straightening this out that I do check that that raw edge of my neckband is sitting on the raw edge of the neckline. So I keep moving my fabric, keep feeling it as well. So I'm going to go all the way around now. I'll go press the neckband, and then we can look at putting on the sleeves. Now, once your neckband is sewn onto your top, you are going to again press for me, making sure that you're getting the seam allowance nice and flat. We want it to actually lie flat against the body of the top. We don't want it rolling up towards the neckband itself. Also, for our new dressmakers, at this point I'm going to ask you to double check what you've done. Make sure on the seam that we see between our top and our neckband, I just want you to go all the way around, making sure you didn't go and sew in a little pucker. It's something that can happen when we're working with the neckband and the neckline. We are stretching it, and sometimes it just happens that we just get a little bit of a fold happening in our fabric on this area. So make sure that everything is smooth. You're also going to double check that you don't have excessive pulling on a certain area of the neckband. Now once this is done, we can now move on to our sleeves. Now when we're sewing sleeves, there's two methods of doing our sleeve. The one is where we take the sleeve and we sew that underarm seam of the sleeve closed. So we'll take our sleeve, fold it in half, and we'll go and sew that close. We'll also then sew the side seam that we just can go and then sew this cap we've got into the armhole. Now this for me is the method that you would always use when you're working with woven fabrics. On a woven fabric you would also have had to ease in that cap because the cap will be longer than the armhole. When I'm working with my stretch fabrics, I like to actually do the method where we're going to lie the fabric flat in front of us. And I'm doing it this way so you can visually see the side seams have not been sewn and the underarm seam of my sleeve have not been sewn. We're basically going to then sew our sleeve cap into that armhole while we've got that side seams open. So that is always going to be your best method when you're working with your knit fabrics, unless you're working maybe with a more stable knit like a Ponte-Roma, a thicker knit, where you might still have to ease in this cap a little bit. So all you're going to do for me is place it in front of you like this, and I'm doing it visually so you can see the underarm hole, you can actually see that sleeve cap as well. So once you've placed it like this, you're going to double check yourself. Remember, on our sleeve cap, we've got notches. We've got 2 notches, which means it is the back. I've just nipped mine in, which means it goes to the back. This is the back of my cap. And then we've got 1 notch, which indicates that it is the front. So as we're looking at my top here, I can see the scoop neckline, so I know this is the front. This is the back. And you would also, I just want to see if I've done mine, you would also have your notches on the armhole. I think I actually didn't do my notches there. But you are then going to now pin your sleeve cap, and you're going to pin it so that the underarm points are going to be matching, your notches will be matching to your armhole, and then where you've got the center of your sleeve cap, that's going to match to that shoulder seam. So all you're going to do from here now is just flip it over so we've got the right sides of our fabric together. So my first pin that I am going to place is going to be my underarm points. Like I mentioned previously, I make sure that the areas where I've got to really match up perfectly is pinned, and then I can go and pin in between those pins. So I'm just going to pin on that section, and I'm going to take this underarm point and I'm going to match it to this back underarm point of my top that I'm making. So let's just go place our pin there. I'm doing the detail like this and explaining it like this so that if you are new, I'm hoping that you can follow along what I am doing step by step. Then my next one is going to be to take my center of my cap, and I'm going to go and pin it onto that shoulder line. Again, making sure my notches is matching to that shoulder line. There we go. And then you're going to match up your notches that you have on the armhole as well as your sleeve. So let's just move everything, and I'm hoping my hands isn't in the way all the time. So there we go. So you'll go notch, and you'll go to the back armhole now, and you're going to match those notches for me. There we go. So notches are matched now. Now I can go and place more pins in between if I want to. Now once you've pinned everything, you're going to go to your sewing machine or your overlocker, and you are going to then just go and sew all the way around for us. I do like to sew with my sleeve to the bottom so that and I've just got the armhole on the top, it's easier for me to sew that way. Also, when we do have a sleeve cap that's slightly longer, the feed dogs actually just helps feed that longer piece of fabric into a shorter piece that we do have. So please make sure that everything is pinned now on the sleeves. I'm not going to show you this on the overlocker because it's really just sewing all the way around. Again, making sure that from pin to pin you are matching the raw edges of your fabric. I've sewn in both of my sleeves, so I'm just going to show you what it looks like on the inside with my overlock stitch. So there you can see I've gone and I've just sewn it. I've also pressed it, and when I press my sleeves, I like to press it with the seam allowance going towards the sleeve. Now also when I am pressing, I just wanted to show you something that I do. I don't like to lie it flat on the ironing board, because when I press on this area I can go and stretch out my fabric again on that section. So I do use either my tailor's ham or even this longer sleeve roll that I do have. If you are going to be using an ironing board, please make sure that you use the tip of your ironing board and place this section where you've got that shoulder seam on that tip, letting the rest of the fabric hang down. So let me just show you what I do when I do my pressing of my armhole. So all I do is I really take my roll that I have here and I place the edge of my sleeve that I've sewn. You can see there, I place it there. You can see it's almost mimicking, let's just come up a little bit. If I hold it like that, it almost looks like a shoulder where it's hanging. So what I do, I press on this area. If you need to, you can even bring it closer to the edge of my seam roll, and I just go and I press it over there. Then once that is pressed, I will put my roll or even my tailor's hem down, and then I open up the sleeve, making sure that the rest of the seam is now on my tailor's hem or on the sleeve roll, and then I go and I press it. So I'll press the one side, then I'll move to the other side. But now you'll see when I'm doing it, the part where I've already done my pressing is actually hanging off. I don't want to stretch anything on that area. So that is how I will go and press my sleeve, making sure again that the seam allowance is going to my sleeve. Now once that is done, all we've got left really is to close up those side seams, and then we're going to do our hems. So again, right sides together. Let me just turn my fabric here. And we're just going to be pinning. You're going to pin again on the edges first. So where I do have my hem, I'm going to start at that section. I'm going to place a pin on that section. And let me just move the fabric so it lines perfectly. I've got my underarm point. I'm going to make sure that I'm lining up my seam at that underarm point. And then I'm going to go and pin it at the hem of my sleeve. So we're going to place a pin there. From here, you're going to go and pin in between. If you just get into the habit of doing it that way, you're never going to have where one piece feels like it's longer than the other. So when I've got this, I'm just going to flatten everything, and then I'm going to go and do a couple more pins. I usually go to the midsection, and I can do one there. For me, that is enough to sew, but for the video now, because we are working with ladies that's actually new to garment sewing, I'm just going to do one more pin in between these pins. You don't want to go and do excessive pinning because you can stretch the fabric a little bit more, so I'm not going to be doing pins all the way up. You just need these couple of pins. When it comes to the underarm again, and you'll see as I'm working on my table, I'm always just moving the fabric, making sure everything is flat. I'm going to grab that center of the sleeve, so I'm at the center between my two pins. Let's just make sure everything is lining up here. There we go. So I'm going to place a pin there, and then I can again in between these pins, if you want to, go and do another pin on that section, another pin on this section. Now when you're going to go and sew it for me, you are going to be sewing from your hem all the way up to our hem at the sleeve. When we're sewing it this way, automatically it's pushing our seam allowance up for us. So you're going to now pin both of the side seams. You're going to sew it for us. Now once you've sewn the seam for me, you're going to go and press as well, making sure that when you're pressing, that seam allowance is pressed to the back. Now after sewing our side seams, we've got one step left, and that is going to be sewing our hems. Now you're going to fold up the sleeve hem allowance, and you're also going to fold up the hem allowance at the bottom of your t-shirt. Make sure that you look in the notes for the pattern that you're working with to see what is the hem allowance included in the pattern. Now with the plantain that I am working with, I've got 2 centimeter hem allowance, and I've already gone and I've folded up that 2 centimeters and I've pressed it. Please don't go to your sewing machine without pressing and just start folding and sewing it. You're going to actually get a very untidy finish, because a lot of times what happens, there's a bit of a shift of my fabric, and I can get little almost like little drag lines happening in that hem allowance, and it's clearly, you can see it clearly. You can't go and press it out. It's going to be there forever. So take the time, make sure that you measure whatever your hem allowance is, and you're going to press it. Now I've already gone and pressed mine up, and then after you've done the pressing of your hems, you're going to go and sew it for me on the sleeve, and you're going to sew it also at this bottom hem. Now before you go to your machine to go and finish your t-shirt by sewing the hem, we're just going to talk about what stitch do you want to use to finish that t-shirt hem now. Now first off, I've got my samples in front here. I've done 3 different stitches. If you do have a cover stitch, it's always going to be your best option to go and use a cover stitch to do your hem. Now my cover stitch is in at the moment for a service, so I couldn't do a sample of it, but the cover stitch on the right side of the fabric actually shows a double row of stitching, just like what you're seeing over here. And if you look at the photo now that I'm sharing with you, you can see what the bottom or the wrong side of your garment is going to look like. It really gives you that ready to wear finish that you will find in your store-bought clothing. Now, my sample that I've actually done a twin needle, also known as a double needle stitch. I've done a stretch stitch, which is also known as a lightning stitch. It's a very, very small zigzag stitch, and I've done my straight stitch. The whole thing is, when we are hemming a stretch fabric, we want to make sure that whatever stitch I'm going to use, that the fabric is still giving with that stitch. If it's not going to allow for that fabric to give or to stretch a little bit, I'm going to find that as soon as I pull tight on that fabric, the stitch is actually going to pop, and we're going to have this whole hem unraveling again. So let's look at our first stitch that I have done as a sample to show you. This is a twin needle, or some people like to call it a double needle. Now, when we're working with our twin needle or a double needle and you're working with a stretch fabric, please make sure that you've got the twin needle for a stretch fabric. We've got twin needles, and I'm actually going to put it like this and bring it a little bit closer so you can see. We've got either that red plastic section over there or the blue. Now, the red is for universal, meaning it is a universal needle, meaning it's for woven fabrics. Woven fabric is non-stretch. And then I've got the blue, which is going to tell me then that that is for my stretch fabrics. So I've got one in front here as well, just so that you can see what your needle container will look like. You've only got one needle in there. Now, the information that we want to look for when we are going to be buying a twin needle will be a section where it's going to tell you 2.5/80, or it might say 4/90, anything like that. The 2.5, or if there's a 4 or a 6, that is talking about how wide, and let's put it on the fabric again. Oops, there it just goes. Let's just get it back there. That is telling me the distance between my two needles. So that is how wide my stitch is going to look. So the one that I've used is 4, which is 4 millimeters. You also get a 2.5, which is very narrow. If you've got a machine that allows for a wide decorative stitch, like a 9 millimeter stitch, then you can start looking at going to a 6 millimeter or a 6 needle as well, because that's quite a wide opening that we do have. But for stretch fabrics, I do prefer the 4. I don't like the 2.5. It's too narrow, and I get a lot of tunneling happening between my stitches. Now, if I do talk about tunneling is when it's actually pushing up my fabric, which is between the two stitches, and it almost makes like a little ridge on that area. So we've got to actually try and prevent that from happening. The softer the fabric, obviously, the more you are going to get the chance that it is going to do a little bit of a ridge, or that tunneling that we do get between the stitches. Then you've got to consider some sort of stabilizer when you are going to be sewing those stitches. Now, if we also look at the back of the twin needle, you'll see that it actually does a little bit of a zigzag stitch, and that is what's allowing that stitch to stretch. Look at, if I just hold on there, can you see how that stitch is stretching? So this is perfect for hemming our stretch fabrics. Now, the second stitch that we're looking at is our stretch stitch, and that is a tiny little zigzag. If you look at the photo that I'm sharing with you as well, that was my setting on my machine. It was a 2.5 stitch length, and for the width it's a 0.8. So it's a tiny little zigzag. It almost looks, if you look from far, it almost looks like a straight stitch. And again, if I'm pulling on that, look at the stretch that I do have with that as well. This is also a perfect stitch for sewing your seams if you don't have an overlocker and you want to keep the stretch of that seam as well. Then my next stitch that I have here is my straight stitch. Now, when I work with a straight stitch on stretch fabrics, I do tend to go to a slightly longer stitch. I go to about a 3 or 3.5, and I do go slightly lower on my top tension as well. That just gives a little bit when I'm working with a straight stitch. If I don't do that, the straight stitch pulls so tight that I am going to snap it. Now, with my settings that I've done, like I said, a longer stitch, which I worked on a 3, I went down about I think from about a 5 to a 4.5 on my tension, and now you can see I've still got, and I can really pull it. Look how my straight stitch is also still giving with the fabric. So those are your 3 choices that you're going to work with. You are going to have to test it on your fabric, especially if you're going to be working with a straight stitch. You want to make sure that that stitch is not pulling tight and actually snapping. You've got to make sure there's give to that stitch. Otherwise, your best choice on a sewing machine, if you don't have a double needle, is to go and do that little zigzag stitch. So that is how easy it is to go and sew a t-shirt. Now, if you're looking at ready to wear, just go and have a look. You'll see there's so many different fabrics out there, but everything at the end of the day, if you look closer, it's just a basic t-shirt pattern that they've maybe just altered a little bit, just gone and maybe used printed fabric like what I have here. Then it actually just looks different to an everyday t-shirt that you would wear. It just looks like a beautiful stretch top. So there's so much you can do with these 3 patterns now that you've downloaded. Each one of them will have a different look on your body, so play around with them, be adventurous, and make all sorts of different t-shirt tops for yourself. So go enjoy your sewing, and I'll chat to you again in the next video.